Alrighty, here we are. We're
What's
beginning.
up?
Hello, hello, what's up?
So excited to be here, yo.
I am very excited to be in conversation with you, my friend. Yeah. Uh,
Uh,
yeah.
We've been talking about this
People,
for some weeks, so I'm really excited for it to actually happen.
months. I
Here
feel
we
like. I feel like I hit you up like pretty soon before the book dropped.
go. Yeah, and we were thinking a lot about what would be best for this kind of book, this kind of project, and I'm glad that we, landed on a conversation where we kind of bring in some theory, bring in some of my poetry, put it in conversation with yours, and really think about what this book is asking us to think about, which is the digital, the body, and everything in between. So I'm really excited to get into this.
Yeah. So I guess what I can start with is I can introduce you and we'll get rolling with your introductory comments and then yeah, we'll go from there. So let me pull up your bio. Gotta read the bio for sure. All right. My friend, the homie, Vincente Perez, also known as Subversive, is a Black Mexican American poet, scholar, and writer working at the intersections of poetry, hip hop, and Black digital praxis. They are a PhD candidate in the Performance Studies program and a 2021 to 2022 Poetry and the Senses Fellow at UC Berkeley. His poetry and cultural work has been featured on Poetry Online, Digging Through the Fat, AOIR, River and South Review, and more. Find more of their work at vincenteperez.com. So the the ground is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, when Aerik kind of reached out about this kind of project, I had just spent the fall doing a little bit of work on anagrammatical digital blackness, and I think this is a wonderful segue into talking about this book because within the book, like I witnessed so many different ways of engaging with the digital, and I think what was so powerful about the book is trying to figure out all the different ways we are mediated. And I think that's been a big question for a long time. And so just to kind of throw in some of my work in the scholarly world into this conversation, I think it'd be important to kind of move to a text that actually I think um, both of us, it really spoke to both of us, this text. And so just to start off really quickly, and you can throw the quote up whenever I get to it. But yeah, I just wanted to add in that, we're really trying to, as poets, trying to figure out this world that we're in that is a very digital world. And so I had to really look back in my notes, and I want to introduce myself and read some poetry, but really start with Dr. Christina Sharp's work. And so I study and practice Black poetry as this like anagrammatical praxis. And so I argue that whiteness has a drive, and its drive, this libidinal drive, it's this drive that is always moving towards logic and order and reason. And so I think Black poets are actually refusing this logic, and they actually rework reality itself. So for my thinking on Blackness and anagrammatical, you'll see this quote right here from Dr. Christina Sharp from the text in the Wake, where she argues, I arrive at Blackness as is anagrammatical. So Blackness anew, Blackness as atemporal, in and out of space and time, putting pressure on meaning and that which against meaning is made. Girl doesn't mean girl, boy doesn't mean boy. As the meaning of words fall apart, we encounter the difficulty of sticking the signification. This is being in the wake. This is the anagrammatical. These are Black lives annotated. And so to really kind of explore this concept, anagrammatical digital Blackness, I wanted to kind of apply the concept of the anagram and anagrammatical to other spheres. And so Dr. Sharp is, working a little bit in the visual sphere, and a lot with working a lot with poetry. And so I wanted to think about adding that concept. So what does it mean for Black poets to be engaging in anagrammatical work, to take what's in front of them, remix it, rework it, repeat it with difference to make something new? And so I found that Black poetry has a long tradition of blurring and even disintegrating binaries. There's so much limited thinking around topics like the stage and the page, or the reader and the speaker of a poem, that for me, Black poetry just completely disrupts. And so within this long tradition of remixing and refusing the logic of whiteness, I felt that it was just important to add in the digital sphere, where this is continuing to happen just within its own unique parameters. So for me, the digital sphere is once again a place, a space, a little bit of both, where whiteness attempts to establish its dominance by acting as this sort of default, this norm. And so the average, typical, normal, default user, even in the digital sphere, is assumed to be white. And so to be thinking about the Black anagrammatical, I want to try to focus on, within the anagrammatical, that there's a chance to language, perform, and explore Blackness under different parameters, ones that are outside of whiteness itself. And so Sharp gives us the idea that there are orthographies of the wake. So it's not just that Black people are being in the wake and all the different iterations of the wake, but that the wake actually gives us a chance to do work. Real creative labor comes from this acknowledgement of being in the wake. So Sharp writes, orthographies of the wake require new ways of writing, new ways of making sensible. How might we understand a variety of forms of contemporary Black image making and as refusals to accede to the optics, the disciplines, and the deathly demands of the anti-Black worlds in which we live, work, and struggle to make visible all kinds of Black past, presents, and possible futures? And so within this quote, I really wanted to see Black poets as those people, as folks who are really working to add a new lexicon to Black life, Black possibility, even if we're going to acknowledge the sheer presence of Black death that surrounds us. And so that kind of brings me to some of my poetry. So I wanted to start by reading one poem, and this poem is titled World Making. Enough words. Too many representatives and not enough life. Another panel, focus group, a spirited discussion, but land isn't back. You cannot make a plantation home. Progress is Febreze spray on decay. You cannot own earth by drawing out borders. A nation is a story made to make the human the hero, the slave and savage the villain. White sees red, blacks out. Wakes up bloodied victor, seeing all things as fertilizer to its insatiable drive. A manifest destiny inspired joyride barreling towards a reaping all will experience, but few will profit. This whiteness, this motive plays in our face and demands our serious engagement. This professional business suits nooses and zip ties, code death into a neat algorithm, replacing life with Black death, replicating life with Black death, redacting truth with Black death, rejecting life for Black death. Life is Black death. And then I want to do maybe just one more poem and then get into some more of introducing Aerik, their work, and getting involved into this, not only reading, but conversation about Body Electronic. This next poem is one I've been working with and working on for a while. It has many different titles. It's called Punchline After Punchline. I started a poem about a week ago. The punchline hasn't landed yet. Dad isn't home. He started a poem 28 years ago. On his own tenure clock, he has done his time. I tossed up my graduation cap. I am still in school. He is still in prison. Our first conversation was just punchline after punchline. A mouthful of bullets made a son. Masculinity got a software update. I'm not sure I can tell him I'm more nigga than man since he thinks I'm one of the good ones. Even if that should mean a real nigga, a man precedes me, a lethal namesake. He is inside because he kept a dangerous thing too close. Like father, like son, I learned to pack a punch and keep it handy. I'm writing this down, free to send punches wherever I want, to a time card, to a poem, to myself. I put a punch down on a page, called it a poem, workshop myself, hoping I end up somewhere different than when I started. Thank you. Thank you. And so I'm again, anagrammatical digital blackness is just about thinking about how the digital is really mediating us at all times, thinking about avatars, thinking about anonymity now, thinking about surveillance culture and trying to skirt it and live amongst it. I mean, we really just have to think about the way that the anagrammatical helps us think through how blackness circulates. The idea that the digital sphere is just like an open, positive, progressive space is something that Black people have known not to be true since the beginning of blogs and the early internet. And so anagrammatical digital blackness is an opening, is a way to see the anagrammatical, is a way to explore these mediations and to see how anti-Blackness still circulates, even as sometimes a joyful expression of Blackness. And so I really want to just think about appropriation, think about mediation, think about the body while we listen to Aerik really share their work and, complicate these things we think we already know. And so just to start with a really quick bio, Aerik Francis is a poet and teaching artist born and based in Denver, Colorado. We first met about 10 years ago in Chicago, slam community. We did a lot of really fun shit, but now we're switching to, the literary world, so to speak. But I'm glad that, we really had the chance to just sit and have a conversation about body electronics. So please start us off. Jump in, please.
Okay, word. Yeah, thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you so much for those introductory words and thoughts. Yeah. So what's up, everyone? We are here today to celebrate the release of the background is the same book, Body Electronic. Okay, Body Electronic. Yeah, it's the chapbook. I just put a link to order it from Trouble Department, which is my press. I just put a link in the YouTube chat along with my website. And there's also a link to Vincente's work. And yeah, so what I want to do to start off this conversation is just read a few poems from this book. And then we'll go from there. Also, in addition to, because I have to remember to be a commercial, in addition to the link in the chat, you can also just DM me. I have like fresh copies. I have a bunch of fresh copies. That's $15, only $15. And I'll send it to you. So just DM me with all of your info. Okay, no more commercial. We're gonna get into some poems. This is Body Electronic. I want to start off with a poem that's sort of near the beginning. There's a point in which I had this as the opening poem, but yeah. Also, hold on. Let me get Vincente back in here. Yeah, I'm gonna have you a little bit small here and then we'll go to the. Anyway, I'm over explaining. Let's get into the poems. So the first one is gonna be called Digital Footprint. I open a new window, hurl everything out into the portal void of space. Precious gems. Early morning stimuli to new news, grief latent blunders, all coded binary. I drag bags to trash, walk away from explosive words into rubble and puzzle piece debris. All of my cadavers unearthed. Am I afraid? Undead only threaten to progress, a notion dependent on a flattened former self, nostalgic ugly, an unannotated, fully redacted archive, a utopia never to know, a graveyard, visitor vacant. Okay, so that was the first poem, Digital Footprint. Yeah, I usually when I perform poems, I'm like used to like having some banter, but we're about to have like a whole discussion. So I'll get the poems out of the way and then we can do the banter part. So the next one is called A Possession. A possession. Someone decides to take time to post on social media. Someone slides their finger over their device, presses gently, firmly. Someone's are notified. Phones glimmer and shake from the notification stimulation. Someone's are compelled to return to the site, to hover a cursor upon their notifications. They will notice propagation and its implications. Deluge of dopamine flowing through internal and systemic. Notification color bolding in the iris, vibrations frictioning the thigh, pings hitting the eardrum like a name, microsense of chemical reactions frothing in the nostrils, gooing sticky along the gums. And I too am drawn to flatten a button, to hit a heart, meaning to observe deep historical manipulation. Repeat.
Yeah.
Repeat. Thank you. Repeat.
Yeah.
Repeat. Systems of repetition. Repeat. Systems of repetition. Repeat. Systems of repetition. We are to bear witness. We are to bear witness. We are to bear witness, merely bear witnesses, witless in the face of systemic oppression, a system of repetition, systemic repetition of murder. The same new murder each day on the news, the same murderous news autoplayed, assassinations on social media platforms, same platitudes and scripts for subsidiary news broadcasting another murderer with a manifesto manifesting another murderer just doing their jobs. Another employed militia man subsidized and pardoned another murderer naming another murder and another and another and another and another and etc 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 more and more and more and etc 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 and every ampersand and every and every etc is a person as we are. A corporation is a person. A nation is a person. A state creating personhood just to take it away. People killing people with guns. Our gross domestic product. What is the expectation of global governance? Concentration camps are globally governed, openly aired, direct lead filled pipelines to open air prisons, open air slave auctions, open air pollution, open air oppression, open air asphyxiation. When the internet is cut and drowned, the revolution will not be televised. It will be aired. Aired. The revolution will be air. We are to bear witness. We, as bear witnesses, restless, breathless, witless in the face of systemic oppression, systems within systems, reproduction systems, mass fibrosis of systems, reiterative repetition systems. I can't breathe. Alrighty, so that was that one. And then I have one more. One more. This one is called lagging. This is one that I usually perform. So yeah, let's do a performance. Lagging. 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 I've had a flinch for a while. Sometimes I hear laughter within earshot. I get a jealous rush. I catch nervous laughs too. A question gurgles in my belly, urging to know, is it about me? And it seldom is. No, 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 not anymore. It seldom is. No, 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 no. No, that was really funny when they saw you lagging. They killed your character. That was really funny when they saw you lagging. Lagging. It's a glitch. I lag. You lag. IRL. URL. We are lagging right now. Public policy is designed to lag. The Supreme Court is designed to lag. The economy is designed to lag. Emergency responses are designed to lag behind. Digestive systems, reproductive systems, repetition systems designed to lag behind. Lag is usually a hardware problem. Maybe you felt this too. Laughing can sometimes feel like lagging. You should have known your system was lagging. It's been hacked, ////. You should have known your system was lagging. You should have known. Good lag, good laugh, good lag, good lag, good laugh. My mind is malfunctioning, functioning. I'm lagging. Hardware, hard-worn error in my lung, unsupported devices, unplug. Plug in my devices so my brain can't translate my tongue. Twitch, stream me, twitch, stream me, twitch, stream me, twitching, switch swiftly, Mrs. Quicken, mental limits, fickle pivots, pick with sticky, stingy digits, sin and forbidden, given for unforgiven. It's a glitch, it's a glitch, it's a glitch, it's a glitch. I have already admitted it. I had a flinch, had a glitch for a while. So now lagging just feels like laughing. Good lag, good laugh, good lag, good lag, good lag. Good lag, good laugh, good laugh. Okay. That's that. Thank you.
Let's go. Damn. Wow. We gotta start this talk. There's so much to say.
Yeah, let's get into it.
let's just jump right in with the title. I mean, like, Body Electronic. Talk to me a little about like how you came to this title. Were there other iterations? Does it like prime the reader to be in this like imagination or voice of this book? How does it work and function for you?
Okay. That's a great question, first of all, because there is a constant confusion that happens with my title that I've noticed. Also, I don't know what's going on with the light, but it's adding to all of the body electronic things.
Adding
So
lighting.
It's adding. So shout out to the lighting. It's natural. So the title, the lighting is super tripping me up. The title is It pretty much stuck. I came up with body electronic. It gets confused with body electric, which I think is a quote from a Whitman poem. It's like I sing the body electric or something like that. Um, and it wasn't necessarily an inspiration for my book. This was an offshoot of the manuscript, the full length collection I'm working on called Body Politic. And I kind of noticed that as I was putting together that manuscript, what if I just did that? Okay. uh, I kind of noticed that in putting together that manuscript, I had a lot of poems that were really considering what it means to exist on the internet and what it means to have a physical presence or bodily presence in your like digital lives or digital atmosphere. Also, let me switch that too. And and so I kind of like that ick that comes at the end of politic, and I wanted it to like be like body politic, but also I was thinking a little bit more expansive than just merely electricity or electric. I was thinking about electronics, like actual devices that we use and hold and touch. And I was also um considering, maybe not as deeply, but inviting in the interpretations of like electrons, as in like a body electronic, a body composed of electrons, as well as um, all of those other like nuclear elements, and thinking about like how electrons operate, how when you observe them, they like go to a different place, they're unobservable, and thinking about, you know, just that complexity of the body that is constantly changing even when it's observed. Again, thinking about like those surveillance mechanisms of like the internet and stuff, but also just thinking about the body as a device, the body as it interacts with devices.
Mm.
Yeah, that's sort of what I had in mind in thinking about body electronic. Just not merely like electricity, but like electronics, like the circuitry of it all.
I'm in here writing because these are like poem titles, you know, the body as a device. Like I could just see so
Mm,
many like, different poems coming from a lot of what you're saying right now. And thinking about how this work relates to the concept of electrons is really interesting. The other day, I don't know if you remember our conversation, but I was talking to you about this weird concept of like the one electron theory. And there's just like weird conspiracy that the world, human experience or experience itself is just the presence of like being this one electron that is moving around. I think there's so much to be said about how you're able to expand, you know, something, expand on things in the digital sphere by like showing how much is within it. And like that is what I imagine to be like how atoms are colliding and we learn from them. It's just like collision and then everything comes out and we explore. So I really want to just keep going on that end and talk about this connection with the electronic world, the circuitry involved in that world. So I think if I can just like ask, you know, and you can take this as far as you want, like what are the mundane things that you're asking your reader to reconsider with the critical lens? So as they come into this, you know, this book, this text, with all their given, you know, knowledge that they have to have just to be in this world that is so digital now, what do you want them to reconsider or rethink, rework into their understanding of life now that it is highly digitized?
yeah. I want to quote my friend to answer that. Friend and wonderful poet and author Oliver Baez Bendorf wrote a blurb for the book, and what he wrote in it is that that the poems live in actions in which we double across our blurring virtual and physical realms, emptying the trash, opening a window, holding a dead mouse. And I think about that. So like I have like a little mouse right here, and I wrote a poem about how one day it just stopped working, and I kind of had this like this relationship and this like this emotion to it, like, oh wow, you're dead. What does that mean? And kind of understanding like a relationship of death that transcends life. Like when something dies, it dies. You know what I mean? Like whether or not it's sentient. Like if a dead mouse dies, it's dead in the same way that a living mouse, when it dies, is dead. And that realization of that symmetry of death kind of shocked me. It's like, regardless of whether or not I see something animate or not, sentient or not, as living, it can certainly die. Um, and so that was a really shocking realization. And I sort of took that into my everyday. I think another example is the throwing away the trash. For me, this is a digital thing because just like, every week we have to throw away our trash that we've accumulated, we also have accumulated digital trash that we have to throw away. It's not a regular thing, but like the fact that a trash can exists in this internet is a wild concept to me, because it's like, you know, this is supposed to be stuff that is technically unable to be deleted. And in fact, it can't be. There are some like codes and fragments of the codes of everything that we do online. But like, we've taken our mindset of throwing away things, throwing away trash, throwing away garbage, and we've expanded it such where not only is it something that we think about in our digital life, it's just a way of thinking. We think about people as garbage, we think about things as garbage, we think about digital things as garbage. And that was something that was really troubling to me, but also like really tangible in terms of the digital sense. Like just asking the question, like, why does trash exist online? You know?
Wow, yeah, it's making me think a lot about the idea of like, there's like the meme, that circulates that it's just like, whenever I die, make sure you like clear my history. And I'm
Yeah,
thinking a lot about like refuse and the idea that like, you're making me rethink even the idea that trash is just like a receptacle for discard. When in reality, like we have learned to think of it as such because of this capitalistic system where,
right.
trash doesn't stop at being trash. Like it's not dead, it's not gone. It actually just moves to another place. So the physics of trash, like I'm asked to reconsider as I'm reading your text, as I'm thinking about data, as I'm thinking about
Yes.
remnants, I'm asked to even rethink the physical world and why we even think that by putting something in the trash, it does die, it does go away. Because it ceases to exist.
Yeah, exactly. And like, it's scary because even in this digital sense, it doesn't go away really, but especially physically. And then just those interconnections, like in order to even have a computer to consider things that you accumulated digitally to throw away, you have to have like those raw materials that came from somewhere, that cobalt that came from somewhere, those raw materials to make those chips. And then after your computer dies, you throw it away again. And so all those raw materials are still literally become a kind of trash. And so that cycle is really disturbing to me, to say the least.
Yeah. All right. So it's making me think maybe we should think about not just what we're asked to consider differently with your text, but I wonder if we could talk a little bit about what we should consider alongside. So, what are
Mm.
some of the text and media objects that are in conversation with your chapbook that either are circulating within the book, within the book itself, or something that is like in the room with it, and that would, if you acknowledge its presence, will help you, see deeper into the book. What are some of the things that are text and media objects that are in conversation with this book?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I feel like there's a lot of texts and folks who I'm trying to be in conversation with that I don't necessarily name or reach out to explicitly, but implicitly, I think a lot of those conversations are there. So a couple of folks off the top of my head, I'm thinking like Dr. Ruha Benjamin, or like Dr. Safia Noble, writing about race and technology, writing about algorithms and oppression, writing about the ways in which uh, the tech, like our digital world, is still very much mediated by our cultural and social positions and knowledges that we already have. Um, and so, yeah, I think about a lot of theorists like that. Dr. Sharp, of course, I think in the wake has been really, just as a poet in general. I feel like every single project I do, you can like there's a through line right back to in the wake. Yeah, but a lot of what really inspired this text that I really wanted to think alongside were particularly musicians who are interested in both their sound and their visual scape, um, who wanted to interact with like what it would mean to exist digitally. I think about a lot of the music videos that were created or co-created with this I guess you can call them like digital sculpturists. They're called Pussy Crew, but they've worked with a lot of musicians I really like. They worked with Sevdaliza on her what was the song? That Other Girl, and I think there was another one too. They worked with an artist named Oyinda on a number of remix tracks, as well as a song called Serpentine or Serpentine, where it's like it begins in person and then it transitions into this like digital like animated uh, uh, character avatar. I think about Kalela, the music video for Frontline. I think about Shy Girl, the music video for I think it's Slime. Yeah, and all of these artists who um, predominantly women of color are really demonstrating what it means to live in this current world and how we inevitably have to like interact with digital spaces, and then what it means to have the art and the feeling, the bodily feeling, come into play when we're thinking about like simulations, animations, all of those sorts of things. So yeah, I think about a lot of those artists alongside who else? Oh, and I got to mention some poets too. Um, a poet that I don't explicitly cite in the book, but who has definitely been inspirational to me for this kind of work is Era D. Matthews. Dr. Matthews, they wrote in their book, I think it's called Simulacra. They have a number of poems that are written in the form of tweets, and that's what inspired me to like think about tweets as like, you know, a source for poetry, as poetry. I also think about Harriet Mullen and the way in which she interacts with language, interacts with puns, and interacts with multiplicity in a way that I think, one, I want to carry through all of my work, but two, I think multiplicity is something that really factors largely in Body Electronic. And so I'm inspired by how she extracts language to get that multiplicity. I think an example is like the lagging poem, that you can get laugh and lag in that same word. Yeah.
Yeah. That's like a perfect segue. Like I think actually getting into these poems would be helpful. Like we should get to lagging too, but I wonder if we could start with the way that you have been thinking about repetition in this book. I know that. Let me see.
Yeah.
I think that just and I'll probably just like share the screen, but I've been thinking a lot about what it means to replicate something, to imitate through replication. And so I'm wondering if you could take me through like systems of repetition poem, like your way of thinking through what it means to be repeating something on the page or performing its repetition in a different kind of way in the performance of the poem as opposed to the poem just on the page. Like how have you complicated your understanding of repetition as you've worked on this book?
Yeah, it's definitely been complicated over time, and then like putting the poems in the air is a different sense than like than writing them. I think, for instance, the poem that I performed lagging is a poem that I wrote first, and I couldn't really understand how it would be read out loud because of how it's arranged on the page. I never really considered how it would be performed until I saw um, uh, an artist did this like video, and I couldn't tell if it was like a spoof or not, but they kept saying like they would open up this video and they were just like, "What's up, everyone? All right, what's up, everyone? What's up, everyone?" And like the repetition of it was so awkward, it made it like hilarious to me. And when I saw that, it kind of clicked that I'm like, oh, it's like lag, but it's not like lag because it's a deliberate repetition and there's a slight change in how it gets repeated. And seeing that video kind of helped me like think about how I might read that poem. Um, to go to systems of repetition, I mean, I feel like a lot of people, a lot of particularly Black people, can relate to going on Twitter, going on the news, and seeing the news of another Black person um, assassinated by some institution, probably the police, if not the government, um, over and over and over and over and over again. It's a different person, and it's different circumstances, and yet it's like the same thing. It gets reported the same way, and it gets filtered the same way on our media platforms, wherein we see like the repetition of like, maybe we'll get an advertisement for something I said earlier today again, and then maybe we'll get video that's auto playing of this murder happening before our eyes, and then we get like a mundane observation like, all right, I'm about to go get some ice cream, lol. And it's so jarring, the repetition, because not only does it keep happening and we don't want it to happen in the first place, but like the repetition comes with the repetition of like all the other things that are happening at the same time. So it's like these accumulated repetitions, like, so like it's systemic in that way.
It makes
And
you think.
so
It makes you think of like things like existing, like Kanye says, like everything I'm not makes me everything I am. And so like in these moments, we're forced to really sit with the idea that the digital really will repeat itself to such an extent that the repetitions, despite maybe only being one thing, like imitating something that doesn't exist in the digital sphere, that exists in the physical world, and they're just putting it into the digital sphere. So it exists in that kind of way. But along with repeating it into the digital sphere on its own, we get everything else that comes with it, which is like things that are like not supposed to be there, hauntings. There's,
yeah, and it's like a special kind of repetition that happens digitally, because there's like two additional kinds that are like, you have like the first sort of involuntary one, like lag, where like something just gets repeated just because of a glitch. But then you have like a voluntary repetition that exists digitally, which I think they use like the term in engineering called redundancy. And redundancy is basically where, when you're engineering something, um, you're putting in the same kind of components, or you're putting in like the same sort of commands a number of times, so that if one fails, the other one becomes like a catch, so that your system can keep going even if one part fails. And so there's this kind of repetition that's very intentional, very redundant, that happens in technology, that I also kind of wanted to repeat. Do you want me to put the your share screen up?
Yeah, we can just talk about it really quickly. I just keep coming to like these weird things where, like there's this joke that like life, imitates art, art imitates life. And I think a lot about what it means to be, with the like emergence of meta, with the like way that these like social media specifically, not just like the internet broadly, but like social media attempts to like replicate connection and community and conversation. And these like global telecommunications take what could be a physical conversation between two people and turns it into something that can happen throughout the world, quick speed. But within, like I'm saying, like the emergence of like meta, of Twitter, and all these different things, we see the physical be brought into the digital world in such like a weird, interesting, haunting kind of way. And when I like was talking to you about it, and I was talking through a lot of your work, I was just brought to all the different ways that like it seems like the digital, when it's trying to include physical elements, just tries to recreate the physical world, but it's mediated. So it's never really the same thing. And so the first
Mm-hmm.
example that I came to was just like these weird signal towers that are just meant to look like trees, but they're so obviously not trees. And so
Ugh.
it's such an interesting thing that like these exist out there to like boost signal, so that we can keep communication. They're in the natural world now. And so they're made to look also like it, but they don't at all.
Yeah, it's like it's super uncanny. I mean it's definitely like the uncanny valley. Like the degree in which something is or isn't human, um, and or isn't real. Yeah, it's so disturbing. It's so disturbing. And yeah, I mean, part of the reason why I wanted to write this chapbook is to like bring light to those things that like, I don't know, there's something so disturbing about a lot of digital life, and yet there's something so intimate about it because by and large, you know, it's just me and my computer, you know? And so a lot of these things that we talk about aren't things that like end up getting put into language just because it's so intimate, just because it's so one to one, it's so personal.
Yeah, I appreciate the way you've been talking a lot about presence, about thinking and complicating the idea of digital presence now that the world is heavily mediated and the internet really is like everywhere. I wonder if we could jump into the poem that we were going to talk about in the midst of our conversation, and then keep this idea of presence and revealing stuff within our poetry in mind as you read this poem, and then we start talking about it during the last little bit of our talk.
Cool. Yeah. So all right, I got one more poem to share that we talked about previously. Um, I mean, I don't really think it needs a content warning, but just in case, content warning for like heavy mention of like butt stuff, assholes, poop, fecal matter. Yeah. This is one of the poems that like, you know, like I was talking to my grandma yesterday, and I was at a family event, and she's like, "Oh, you wrote a book?" And I was like, "Yep." She's like, "Can I read it?" And I'm like, at your risk." So this is called syzygy. Oh, and I should say that syzygy is this cool word I learned a couple years back. Someone used it in the sense of meaning like serendipity, like something that happens that's sort of fortuitous, but it really means like the alignment of celestial bodies. Particularly, it's supposed to refer to like the alignment of all of the planets with the sun in a direct line, which is why it's supposed to be serendipity. It's supposed to be really rare. But in thinking about it as like celestial bodies in alignment, I wanted to imagine like bodies as bodies, you know, like as shitting bodies. What would it mean for like a shitting body to align? So syzygy ars poetica or ars poetica. I imagine being afraid and only finding the words, holy shit. Look through the horoscope. Be scheduled to soon be birthed again, a today birthday, another origin point where existence begins in this earthen hellhole, a birth date, a coordinate, a star chart, an alignment of fields, newly built, an erection, erect poem, a rectum, a holy hole, a G spot, an avoidance, another mouth licked, God's lips kissing, can kiss goodnight or goodbye or dilate good eyes, consumes, cannot be penetrated, is not a grave, a birth canal. It is a fault of God, of lines, of fault lines, chasms, cracks, orifices, gaping holes, look like this. Here, a moon poem, a flash poem, a poem of bullshit, unless it is another form of manure, a poem of bodies synced, pissing and pooping and breathing, sometimes simultaneously. Salvation is the language in a freed hemorrhoid, freedom, free at last. Attempting to blame Uranus in retrograde or sextile, I suffer from birth anxiety. I am still that zygote from before. The thought alone makes me re-anxious. Thinking about one's birth is as uncanny as thinking about one's death. God said, the end of humanity is right on schedule, continuing to produce new life amidst market indigestion and the small revolts of deliberate constipation during work hours, revealing that there was, in fact, always a Kaganer smeared under the painting, pushing one out and watching. Bodies, too, are conscious of ecosystems, of economic systems. The feeling of disgust is never merely coincidence. Daily bread becomes bodily taboo. Refuse to refuse, refuse to refuse. A sphincter is haunting. a fairy tale of eternal consumption pooping back and forth forever. Here, primitive streak and accumulation. A poem's asshole clenches, puckers, loosens, farting a release. This death feels like a new beginning. Shit posted on the internet. Currently, in a bar, searched. It is a birthday. Stuck in a YouTube loop. Dear God of internet, at me. Follow me back. Tell me that I'm unique. You and death remember birthdays well, so when my body becomes buried and buried into earth, will you digitally archive my birthday as Earth Day? Imagine. I'm a Taurus now, and you better remember to get me a birthday present for my birthday party and my birthday hole, my Earth Day bidet. Here. I live in anxious synchronicity, the concurrency of ingestion and excretion. Our circulatory systems have their own circulatory systems, bodies of water, bodies of air, bodies of earth, feeble, fecal bodies, organic, divine. There is a God, and in the same image I am holy. There is life today, and death in all the movement of bowels. There is potential for pungent, surprising art defecated out of necessity. A sun spirals, and celestial bodies twist, and organic bodies shit in syzygy. Some calendar ends as excrement, as another begins, as I do, opened.
Oh, wow. What to even ask about this? Like, I'm wondering if you could flesh out some of it for us. I mean, we talked a little bit about some of the references that are in it, like the public. You know, what kind of ideas around the public and private are being explored in this poem?
I like that way of asking the question. Thanks for that. Yeah, so I think I used to say for a while, this kind of was my artist statement. My artist statement was to think about the relationship of farting and poetry, because so much of poetry to me seems like a really quick, like, you know, release, like an excretion of sorts of things that I've been holding on to and things that I've consumed and digested.
Mm.
Um, and, uh, and so there's a kind of politics about farting, right? Because immediately when you say fart, you want to laugh, you want to think about your body as like a dirty, smelly, funny thing. But there's a seriousness about it, you know, like. Thank you for that comment, Kim. But there's a serious about it in the sense of like, um, I mean, everyone farts, and everything had like every living being has to excrete what they've consumed. It's like a part of it. And there's so much that's untapped to discuss within that process because of the way it's been made to seem taboo, or the way in which it's been made to seem like abject. And so this poem is an attempt to like, engage with that which has been considered abject, engage with something that's been considered taboo, and yet is so regular. Um, and a lot of it comes from the language itself. I was thinking about like the term shit posting on the internet and what it would mean to shit post and where the shit comes from, right? Like if you're shit posting, does that make you the asshole? You know? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
yes. um, and so what ended up happening was, because there's a lot of these topics that I'm interested in exploring around like fecal matter and asses and assholes and stuff like that, like the aperture of it all, that it ends up being a really chaotic poem. It ends up being, so I heard this distinction again from the poet Era D. Matthews. I think it was on a podcast, but she was talking about the difference between like Apollo and Dionysus, Apollon poetry and Dionysian poetry, whereas Apollon poetry is a lot more like straightforward. Dionysian poetry, him being the god of wine, it's all over the place. And I like to think of this one more as a Dionysian poem, one that sort of invites all of the shit in, whether or not we talk about it in a way that's thorough or clear. Um, and so, yeah, I think one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to keep and include this poem is because there's actually like really really dense and critical things happening at this level that it's really hard to actually like speak about critically, even though it's happening. I think about like, I guess the example would be that line about primitive streak and accumulation. I think about primitive accumulation, like that Marxist idea, primitive accumulation being like the accumulation that begins the capitalist project, that begins the need for recontrolling the means of production because those means have been accumulated already. But I've started thinking about it on the level of like the body, like in a society, you know, just bare bones, what is something that's automatically going to accumulate on a primitive level? And my answer was excretion, and that this is actually a political problem because as a society, you can't have your excrement nearby people. It just doesn't work. So the question becomes, what do you do with your shit? What do you do with your shit physically, but also what do you do with your shit ideologically?
Yeah, and a poem's asshole, that's the line that really pulled and does a lot of critical work for me, because it's like, if we stop thinking about poems the way white people tell us to talk about and think about poems, what if a poem sometimes does have a bodily element to it? Instead of, you know, just thinking about it in terms of, in literary terms, what if the body does have a system for taking stuff in, taking stuff out, being worked with over time? How, you know, what then becomes the poem's asshole? What then becomes, you know, what function, what can we learn more about poetry if we think about poems in this kind of way?
Right, exactly. Like if we're serious about treating poems as like, I read an essay today by Carl Phillips. It was called like on muscularity and eros, on syntax and all of that sort of stuff. And he was talking about how poems are bodies because poems, like bodies, are made up of systems of patterns. But this is a poem that says, okay, if poems are bodies, then let's treat them as bodies in their fullness, in their wholeness. What would it mean for a poet or for a poem to have an asshole, to have genitals, to have a mouth, to have orifices, you know, all of those sorts of things. And yeah, I think, I don't know if this poem answers those questions more than poses them. But yeah, that line of poet's asshole specifically comes from the poet Joss Charles. I workshopped this poem with her in a workshop with her a number of years ago. And she, in helping me organize some of the chaos, she was like, all right, well, you have to like, you know, figure out how to score this poem, figure out what directions it's going, and then figure out where the poem's asshole is. And it kind of just clicked for me. I'm like, oh yeah, this poem does have an asshole. It isn't just about assholes. It actually enacts that.
Wow. And now I'm thinking about getting your shit together. These different like holes as portals, thinking about directions that we're taught are right. Again, whiteness as order. And that if you really think about the body, it doesn't follow that line of thinking really well. There are way, you know, it's not food in, food out. Don't talk about it. There's so much going on. Like, as you said, like our, you know, our systems have their own systems. And so I really appreciated the way that, you know, by moving us away from the idea, I think even that, you know, poem comes from the mouth, you know, is the feeling organs just being vocalized and being put out of the mouth to really just, my whole sense of direction for how to engage this poem while I'm reading it, even listening to it, I'm asked to like reconsider, you know, what way I'm always supposed to approach this kind of work. And I appreciated that. And that's why I wanted it to be read in the midst of the reading, because it really just does a lot of work of making me look differently, feel differently.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I mean, you know, a part of it gets like there's a part of it where there's like, oh, there's always a Kagner, but like literally I was watching this documentary and they were like cleaning this painting and all of a sudden there's like, oh, there's this figure over there. What is that? Oh, he's taking a shit. That's what he's doing. That's actually what he's doing. And then to sort of like take a step back and be like, there was an artist in the 1650s who decided that this person who was taking a shit in the public realm was important enough to include in this. And then there was someone else who decided that it was important enough to censor that. And then someone who thought it was important enough to uncensor, to redact the redaction, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I don't know. It's hard to talk about that poem because there's so much contained, but I feel like that's ultimately the thesis. The thesis is that there's so much contained there.
Okay. Whoa. We are at the hour mark. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling great. Yeah, this has been great. I'm excited we had this opportunity. I mean, part of the whole reason I wanted to have this chat is because one, I wanted to put fortune into my own hands, right? Like, you know, we're just poets out here. We don't necessarily have as many institutional relationships as some other poets, and so I didn't want to wait to like be like invited to a podcast or whatever. I wanted to be like, no, let's just talk about it. So thank you for being willing to participate with that, and thank you for these questions and drawing out a lot of the things that exist in this book but might not necessarily be so instantly accessible, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that, you know, it's really up to, you know, the artists themselves. You know, if we're going to be, you know, you want to talk about, you know, primitive accumulation, and I love talking about labor. And so the actual labor of being an artist, the actual work involves, you know, rejecting the business banking model that's forced onto us, that we got to, you know, be in these certain kinds of positions and treat each other in certain kinds of ways, when it's like, well, we can just take it ourselves and work with it ourselves. And so I appreciate you knowing that, you know, in working with me, figuring this out would mean that I would, you know, give your text the space that it needs to do its work, and give it a new little nuanced part, because we really can, you know, learn from each other and with each other if we abandon this baking model. Or really, you know, in the practice, you know, poetry is a praxis, you know, it's happening.
Absolutely.
And so good to be talking while it's happening, as it's happening, talking about the poetry, and talking about what goes into it and people's reception of it. I mean, all along that way, all along that process is ways and places to learn. So I appreciate you, you know, inviting me into that space, because it's real. We're really learning our craft and studying our craft by being in these kinds of spaces together.
Yeah, for sure. And then also thank you for your intro and thank you for your poems. I think they really grounded this conversation as well. And I was like low key hoping you were going to read the punch by punch, because you asked me earlier, like, oh, I don't know what poem to read. And I was going to suggest it, but I was like, I don't know, maybe, but then you read it. So yeah, that was great.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking if I could just talk about that poem really quickly. Yeah, punchline after punchline is me just like really trying to think about lineage, thinking about time, and thinking about like these, you know, what it means to come before someone, what it means to be existing after someone, all tied into a complicated relationship with my father and my queer identity. I think punchline after punchline is really just like punches on a page that I turn into poetry, where I'm trying to like really like ignore the direction that I think a poem is supposed to go, which is that I'm not there to punch. You know, a poet doesn't punch. A poet may have a punch line, they may have a line that hits you, but they're doing something else. And I abandoned all of that. And I said with this poem, like, I'm just going to start there. Like, I'm going to start at that punch line. And what does it mean to just spend the whole time just talking about my gender, talking about my relationship to my father, as this process also of punchline after punchline, of just putting the punch down, experiencing the punch, and that being its own kind of form of poetry.
Yeah, I think the thing I really like and admire about that poem, as like it's speaking about like poetry on a meta level, is that it has a concern less with the poem itself and more the process. Like it's less concerned with the punchline and it's more concerned with the punch and the process of punching. And there's that line that happens like near the end where it's like, um, I'm gonna poetry workshop or like poem workshop. And I like that like you didn't stop at the poem, you went to the workshop, and the workshop as a praxis, the workshop as a process. The punch is a process. The punch is a workshop.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really liked all of that dynamic. And yeah, I think it also gets to like what exactly we're doing here, like the process of it all rather than the product of it all.
Yeah. There's like so many superhero movies out, and so many like people are trying to think about like heroes and the powers that they have. And so it was just like me trying to think about like praxis as this like intentional hard thing. Like you have to return to it, like you have to be shaped and molded by it, like it's a body that has to be
Mhm.
broken down in order to be made better. And so thinking about that and poetry as that kind of process has been really, you know, helping me shift my approach to poetry. So I appreciated having the space to talk through that. And, you know, it helps me talk through the poem that I shared first, which is World Making. And the reason why I think it's connected is because that poem doesn't have a specific form right now. Every time I write it down on the page, it changes form because I'm really
Oh, that's
playing with
cool.
the idea of like binary logic as a whole. And so whenever I'm like writing the poem, like I haven't published it yet and I don't know what form it will take, because there's like binary like code in the midst of the poem, which is like just talking about like whiteness as like lies, like as a projection, as a fully artificial idea that's then projected onto the natural world and made real through constant repetition. And so like I really do want to explore this like Afro-pessimistic notion that the world with a capital W only exists because there is something called a black and black suffering. And so whiteness is like, I never want that. That is what I refuse. And so it just keeps repeating this logic and making reality such that there's just distance to the black, distance to the slave, and a world where I argue, and a lot of Afro-pessimists argue, that life itself is Black death. Life itself
Mhm.
is never being Black, never having to think about Blackness as pure abjection, that as source material that you can take from and build from, but Black death being that basis of, you know, Western modernity.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you ground that conversation in like in the digital and you ground it in the repetition. I think it kind of like echoes what's going on with systems of repetition and like how the repetition is so premised on the repetition specifically of Black Death.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, and also what I was going to say is it would be interesting to like just see all of those iterations of the poem and like have them all exist in like the same project.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, like it could even just be the same words but just organized differently and organized with that binary code. I think that could be really interesting to like to really just lean into having all of those iterations and not necessarily choosing one.
Thank you.
But yeah, I guess that's like wrapping up this conversation, huh?
Yeah, I think so. That'd be a really great way to end it. Unless you had like specific questions for me or wanted to talk more about something that came up as you were reading. I mean, I think that's where I would want to end it. It's just like asking you like what was the process like reading the poems and being in this conversation, and um, just thinking about now that this book is out there in the world, like how are you feeling about that?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for those closing questions. Reading felt good. I love the way these poems sit in the air. Um,
Mm-hmm.
some of these poems are actually really obnoxious to me. Like System of Repetition is a poem that I actually don't like because um, I want it to have an exit point. I want it to have like something like, okay, so what do I do to get out of the systems of repetition? Okay, so like, and it doesn't give that. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't like that, but at the same time, I return to it. And so I find that this is a book of poems, especially as I'm on like Twitter and Instagram or whatever every day, that I come back to these poems because I'm like, oh, like I wrote these because this is what I think about like regularly. So it's really nice to have them out and it's really nice to have them in the air because before I had them published, I would still return to them. And it's part of the reason why I collected all of these poems together because yeah, sometimes I don't like these poems, but I find myself going back to them, and it's that return and it's that repetition that really just captivates me and makes me think like it should be out into the world. So I'm very glad that it exists out there. um I don't know. I think I want some more opportunities. I mean, again, this is part of the reason why we're doing this. I'd like some more opportunities to read and share this work. I guess with the pandemic the way it is, it's been tricky to have like a release the way in which one would expect a book release. And I know a lot of folks who've been writing since 2020 have like felt this very, very deeply. So that's been kind of weird. But I don't know. I'm just sort of working through it. I appreciate this space for an opportunity to share it, and hopefully I'll create some more. I'm not necessarily pressed about time. So it's like, especially because it's such a digital project, I'm like, you can get it now. You can even watch this video now or like later in a month, in a year, like it'll just exist there. So I kind of feel the same about the book. What else can I say? I don't know. I'm just excited to have it out there. It seems like I think when it comes to thinking about my work on the whole, I have a lot more projects coming forward, but I like this as a debut, an introduction to my work, because you can kind of see like the whole spread of things I want to talk about and how I want to talk about it, so that when you come to the next project, which will probably be very, very different in form and style and content, you'll still be able to like see the relationships. What else can I say? Oh, I don't know if anyone is in the audience / if you have like questions in the audience, but I feel like now would be a good time for those. But yeah.
We can wait a little bit longer to see if there's any questions, but I just wanted to put something on your mind that I've been thinking about a lot. And my friend, colleague, and professor Abigail DeCosnick is doing a lot of work on this. It's the concept of a media crease. And so like I'm hearing you talk about returning to these objects, even if they're digital, as a repetition, but also as an active process, like it's an object, it has like some type of archival presence. And what Gail DeCosnick says is that like a media is the concept of like even digital artifacts create some type of data or some type of clearly defined remnant of their presence. And it gets complicated in the digital world, but it's still very much there. And so I'm thinking about like what it means, views is the way that we would look at it, but what it means to be returning back to something, to learn from it again, to look at it like YouTube as a digital archive, to have like the questions that would come out in the actual recording or like live performance, but then know that it could exist in another space and have comments. Really helps me, and I'm glad I was here in this space, because I'm trying to work through with Gail this idea of the media crease and how that relates to spoken word poetry and performed poetry. And so it's like we're trying to find ways to, like, instead of like, if you go and find a book that's widely read and it's in a library, you're gonna know that lots of other people have touched the book. And so it's like I'm trying to find, and we are, other media scholars are trying to find this idea of presence and history, how we look at that when there's not those grooves and there's not those cornered pages, but there is that idea of repeat use, of repetition showing up in a different kind of way in the digital sphere. So I think this project is a way of exploring that. This actual conversation is going to be a way of looking into that. And I'm just really grateful that I had the chance to flesh that out with you.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it brings up, like, I guess one last thing that I'll bring up about the topic is I was wondering how I was going to publish this book, because it's so, it's so like it's about the digital existence. And so I was like, all right, so maybe it should exist like digitally. Maybe I should look into a digital chapbook or like putting it online. But I was having a conversation with someone, and they reminded me importantly that like technology as a concept is very expansive, and technology as a concept is old. It's not new. We are constantly creating and recreating technology. So literacy is a technology. The written word is a technology. This book, this binding, this paper are all technologies. And for me, that was really refreshing to like help me remember that. I mean, it brings it back to like the etymology of the word digital. The etymology of the word digital is like the digits, your fingers, it's very bodily. It's something that you create with your hands. Digital comes from the fingers, is the idea of counting. Like you use your fingers to count, but now digital, the counting happens at you know, such a different pace and all of that sort of stuff. And so, yeah, on one hand, it's not a digital, you know, it's a physical artifact. On the other hand, it definitely taps into the same sort of technologies that get us into the idea of the digital in the first place, and therefore, I think, has some sort of resonance with that kind of crease.
This shit ain't new, and there's still new shit.
Exactly, exactly. I think that's as good a place to end as I can think of. I don't think there's going to be any questions. I'm getting some thank yous. Shout out to Jen and Kim for showing up in the chat.
Thanks for kicking it with us. All right. Thank you, Aerik.
All right. Thank you, Vincente. Very, very honored and grateful that you had this conversation with me.
Absolutely. Y'all go.
All right.
Body electronic.
Body, yaddy, 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 electronic.